Hi there, I'm Sandy Allnock here with this month's Create in Color video for my favorite things. And this month I'm going to be using the really cute stamp set called Love You to the Core. And it's a little girl eating apples and sitting on a bench. It's kind of nice that it's all in one image, so you don't have to do any masking or setup or anything. You just stamp it and pick a sentiment to go with it. Nice and simple. And I've stamped it onto some Arches rough watercolor paper. And rough means it's going to have some surface to it. With watercolor pencil, it's kind of challenging for some people because they have trouble getting the color to move. Well, I'm using the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer watercolor pencils, and these in particular melt really nicely. If you're using less expensive watercolor pencils, then you'll have more trouble with the color moving on textured paper. And that's just a symptom of when we buy any art supplies or you buy anything in life, the more you pay for it, the better quality you're going to get. And that's why these colors, you're going to watch them melt out really beautifully. They also come in a set of colors that's so gigantic that you have like a bajillion greens, a bajillion reds, a bajillion browns. You know, like there's like 5 different colors you can use for skin tones and stuff. So it has a really wide selection of colors. And they are quality watercolor pencils as well. So I'm scribbling the color on, and with watercolor pencil, that's just what you do. You don't have to worry about putting down smooth layers or getting your transitions of color to work when it's just pencil on paper, because the water is going to do that work for you. And again, if you're using cheaper pencils, you may want to work on that a little bit more, because the bumps in the paper, the ridges on the paper, tend to hang on to that pigment. If the pigment doesn't melt out really easily, then you're going to end up with dots of color across it, and it's not going to melt out or turn into watercolor. I'm using a silver brush. It's from the Black Velvet line from the Silver Brush Company. This is, I believe, a number 12. And these brushes hold a good bit of water. So if you are having trouble and you're like, geez, mine doesn't melt away like hers, it's either your pencils that are less expensive pencils, or it's that you're not putting enough water down, because a lot of brushes will not hold as much water as these brushes do. So I recommend always getting a good brush in order to get good results. You could also use less textured paper than this. This is the rough, but it just, for me, gives a little more of a watercolor feel, and on the trees, it's going to make a big difference in giving them that really rough look. So here I got too much water on the surface, so I just dabbed off a little bit. Be careful, every time you dab, you're pulling pigment off as well, so you may need to put another layer of pigment on later if your color lightens too much. So I'm just going to move around my image, and I'm going to try to not paint images that are right next to each other, because the watercolor is going to grab whatever color's next to it. If your brush touches the red dress while you're coloring the brown skin or the tan skin, you're going to end up with the bleeding going on from one area into the next. So you do need to be a little careful. But again, with good watercolor pencils, you're going to be able to lift off that color and pull it back up off of the image. So you're going to be able to repair from that. Some pencils are a little harder to lift. And as you get to know whatever brand of pencils you're using, you'll find out what tolerance your pencils have for how much that they can lift. So look how rich her dress comes out, but it's already seeping into her leg. So you have to be careful with things like that. And what I do is just try to constantly, with my eye, go back and look at what I just finished to see if it started moving, because sometimes it won't move right away, but it will start later. Like this apple might start bleeding into her face, so I'm just going to constantly look at it till I'm sure it's getting to the dry side. And since I did have that problem, I'm going to, skip out, and I'm going to start doing some of the background while I wait for her apples and her dress to dry, because I don't want to make that green jacket bleed into anything. And with her hair, I wasn't too worried about that blending into her face, because the skin tones are just about dry now. And even if they did, I could move that color around while it's wet, and it's going to match her skin anyway. So I'm going to pick a horizontal and then just do some scallops above it. So just scribble some scalloped shapes and then make a horizontal line for your horizon. and then just scribble some colors in. And I'm just going to pick a couple of different shades of yellows, reds, and oranges to fill in the area. And literally just don't stress out about like, oh, it doesn't look like a tree. The one thing to watch out for is to make sure that you don't put red next to the red apples, and that you have more yellow next to the red apples, so that you have some difference in color between what's in the foreground and what's in the background. And that's the only thing that I'm really paying much attention to in terms of looking for where to put my colors down. If you make your spots much smaller with each of your pencils, then your trees are going to look like they're further away, that's all. So you can make big blobs of trees like I'm doing here. You can do small blobs, but you really just want to give a sense of the background. Don't stress out about making everything look exactly like a tree. So I'm going to use one of the flesh tones that I used, and I'm going to create a little bit of a path that she's sitting on, and it's going to go back in a triangle shape. So that's a receding little horizon line that I'm pointing those lines so that they end up in one spot in the back. Just make a triangle shape and you'll be fine in creating a scene like this, so it looks like she's maybe on a little path or something with grass on either side. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to it just because yellow is my favorite color, and that will add a little sparkle to the ground she's sitting on. And then I'll add some shading underneath of the bench and underneath of her feet. And then I'll be able to go back to all of my watercoloring with the brush and start seeing what happens. So first I'm going to start with her green jacket. And there were a couple greens in there. You can see that they do mix as you start painting with the either water brush that you're using or the watercolor brush that you're using. And since the dress is dry, I'm not having trouble with the green and the red blending into each other. Just on trying to pull the right amount of water so that I don't swamp her jacket, because I don't want her jacket to be like just totally mushed out. I want to keep some of that shading, but as I have color on my brush, I can move it from one side to another if I end up with too much on one end and not enough on the other. Get her little socks all painted in. And then since I'm working on green, and I also want to let her green jacket dry for just a little bit while I work on the green grass, I will paint the grass while I'm waiting for that part to dry. And you can heat set, of course, your watercolor paper, but I find that it curls a lot more when I heat set it, so I don't like to do that. I also have taken to just putting a little bit of adhesive underneath of my paper rather than taping it down all the time. Sometimes I tape it down, but you can see I'm not having any curling troubles here by just having a little bit of adhesive underneath of the paper. And now I'm just with a clean wet brush going right over top of my trees. And I'm going to pick my yellow trees first because I want the yellow trees to stand out. If I start painting with the red and then move the red into the yellow, I'm going to end up moving all that pigment into my yellow trees. And I like yellow, so I want to make sure I have enough of that color there. So rinse the brush and dry it off periodically as you're trying to change from one color to another, except in the spots where you want them to blend with each other. And look how this orange and red are coming together to make a really fun tree shape and tree color. And the colors are, this is where the rough paper makes a difference. You can see where that orangey red color is moving itself into the yellow. And it's not doing it in a solid shape. It's doing it like with little fingers because it's traveling along the texture of the paper. And since this is highly textured, think of it as a carpet versus tile. A piece of tile, everything's going to go out. If you spill a glass of milk on tile, it's going to go out in a smooth circumferential shape, I guess, with hard edges. And if you pour the same glass of milk on a piece of carpet, it's going to go out in like little fingers and like crawl out through those fibers. And that's what the difference is with rough paper or cold press paper rather than smoother watercolor papers. So you get those beautiful edges. Look how those trees just kind of mushed together and blended into each other with really nice soft edges. Really nice. So now I can just finish it off by adding a little bit of water into the ground. And I'm careful where I'm adding it right underneath where that shadow is because I want to make sure that I don't disappear that shadow entirely. If you flood it with water, you could end up with that shadow going away, and then you have to wait for it to be completely dry before you go over it again to add more. So if you want to do it all in one layer, then be careful not to pull that color out too much and lose all of that beautiful shading that you put down. So now I'm just going to finish it off, moving a little bit of color as I get some yellow on my brush to get into some areas that didn't have as much yellow in them. Smoothing out the ground in the spots where I need to. And all is left is to put it onto a card and do a little bit of embellishing with it. I popped the panel with some dimensional adhesive onto some daffodil yellow cardstock, and I added a nice big silk bow. This is silk ribbon from May Arts, and I put a little bit of glossy accents on the apples and on her shoes, so she would have shiny apples and shiny shoes to enjoy on her little card, which I thought was kind of cute. Glossy accents is just one of those things that always makes things sparkle just a little bit. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click the like button. Make sure you leave some comments here and over on the MFT blog, and I will see you guys again another time. Have a really awesome day. Bye-bye.